The Great Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with voices from 100 different worlds. Alien beings filled the massive chamber, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes. Some floated in special containers filled with gas. Others stood on multiple legs or slithered across the polished floor. The air hummed with translation devices working to turn thousands of different languages into something everyone could understand. In the far corner of the hall, almost hidden behind a support beam, sat the human delegation. There were only 3 of them. Taemin, the human ambassador, wore a simple dark suit that looked plain next to the bright robes and armor of the other delegates. Next to him sat Minna, a trade representative, and beside her was Junwoo, a cultural attaché. They had been given the worst seats in the house, squeezed into a space so small that larger species would not have fit. This was no accident. For the past 50 years, the human delegation had been moved further and further from the center of power. What had once been a respectable position near the main speaking platform had slowly become this forgotten corner. The other species barely remembered humans were there anymore. Council Speaker Veltar rose from his throne-like chair at the center of the hall. He was a hegemony leader, tall and thin with blue-gray skin and 4 arms. His voice boomed through the translation system as he called for order. The hundreds of conversations slowly died down until the hall was quiet enough to hear the soft hum of the air recycling systems. Today we implement the redundancy protocol, Veltar announced. His 4 hands moved in practice gestures as he spoke. After careful study, the Council has determined that certain species contribute functions that can be better performed by others or by our advanced systems. Taemin did not move. He had known this day was coming for months. The signs had been clear to anyone who cared to look. Human requests for meetings had been ignored. Human proposals had been tabled without discussion. Human expertise had been replaced by artificial intelligence systems and automated protocols. The species known as humans, Veltar continued, have served the galaxy for 300 years. However, their contributions are no longer unique or necessary. Other species can perform their functions more efficiently. Their presence in the council is therefore redundant. A few of the alien delegates turned to look at the human corner. Most seemed surprised that humans were still there at all. Some nodded in agreement with the speaker's words. A few looked uncomfortable, but none spoke up. Effective immediately, Veltar said. The human delegation is dismissed from council participation. All human personnel in galactic service are requested to complete their duties and return to their homeworld within 6 standard months. Taemin stood up slowly. He was not a tall man, and in this hall full of giants and floating gas beings he looked very small. But there was something in the way he moved that made nearby delegates pay attention. He gathered his papers with careful, deliberate movements. He picked up his simple briefcase and tucked it under his arm. Then he did something that surprised everyone. He bowed. Not the deep, submissive bow of a defeated person, but the respectful bow of someone saying goodbye to old acquaintances. He turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the now silent hall. Minna and Junwoo followed him. They did not hurry. They did not look back. They walked with the same quiet dignity that Taemin had shown. By the time they reached the massive doors at the entrance, conversations had started up again behind them. The galaxy had already moved on. Outside the council building, news reporters from dozens of worlds waited for reactions to the day's announcement. They pushed forward with cameras and microphones, shouting questions in multiple languages. Taemin stopped and waited for quiet. "Do you have any response to your dismissal?" asked a Nexari reporter, her crystalline form glittering in the artificial sunlight. "We wish the galaxy well," Taemin said simply. "We came in peace. We served with honor. Now we leave with dignity. Will humanity appeal this decision?" Another reporter called out. "No," Taemin replied. "The council has made its choice. We respect that choice. What will your people do now?" asked a third reporter. Taemin looked up at the sky above the capital city. Ships from 100 worlds moved through the atmosphere like schools of metal fish. For 3 centuries, many of those ships had been guided by human traffic controllers, supplied by human logistics experts, and protected by human peacekeepers. "We will go home," he said. The human delegation walked away from the council building and climbed into their simple transport vehicle. As they flew back to the human embassy, Minna spoke for the first time since leaving the hall. "The president is waiting for our signal," she said quietly. Taman nodded and activated his communication device. The message he sent was short. Winter has come. On Earth, President Bo-Ram received the coded message in her office in Seoul. She had been expecting it, but it still made her heart heavy. She stood up from her desk and walked to the window that looked out over the sprawling city. Millions of people went about their daily lives below, not knowing that their relationship with the galaxy had just changed forever. Bo-Ram activated the emergency communication system that connected her to every human world and station in the galaxy. Her message would reach the lunar cities, the Mars colonies, the asteroid mining stations, and the distant frontier settlements where humans had built new homes among the stars. My fellow humans, she began, today the Galactic Council has chosen to end our participation in galactic civilization. They have decided that we are no longer needed. We will honor their decision with grace. She paused, looking out at the city lights that had begun to twinkle in the evening darkness. We will not protest. We will not beg. We will not make ourselves unwelcome where we are not wanted. Instead, we will return to our own worlds and our own destiny. All humans in galactic service should complete their current duties professionally, and then come home. All human businesses should fulfill their existing contracts and then close their operations. All human settlements in non-human space should prepare for evacuation. Bo-Ram's voice remained calm and steady throughout the announcement. She had practiced this speech many times but had hoped never to give it. We are not leaving in anger, she continued. We are leaving because we choose dignity over desperation. The galaxy will continue without us, and we will continue without the galaxy. Begin preparations immediately. We have work to do. Across human space, the message was received and understood. There were no protests in the streets. There were no angry demonstrations outside alien embassies. Instead, humans quietly began the largest evacuation in the history of the galaxy. On the frontier station Kepler Base, Human Administrator Sujin finished filing the daily reports that kept 3 different alien trade routes running smoothly. She had done this job for 8 years, solving problems that the automated systems could not handle. Tomorrow she would train her replacement, a highly advanced artificial intelligence that the station's alien owners believed could do her job better. On the luxury liner Starwind, human diplomat Do Hyun mediated a dispute between Zephyrian passengers and the Crystal Consortium crew. It was the kind of small conflict that could grow into a major incident if not handled carefully. He had prevented 17 such incidents in the past month alone. After today, someone else would have to handle such problems. In the deep space monitoring station at the edge of civilized space, human technician Wu Jin watched the sensor screens that tracked ships, debris, and other objects moving through hyperspace. His patterns recognition skills had prevented 47 accidents in the past year by spotting problems that computer systems missed. Soon those computers would have to work without human intuition to guide them. All across the galaxy, humans began the quiet process of stepping back from their roles. They trained their replacements as best they could. They wrote detailed reports explaining their procedures. They tried to pass on the knowledge they had gained through years of experience. But some things could not be written down or taught to machines. Some skills came from intuition, from understanding, from the human ability to see patterns and make connections that others missed. These skills would leave with the humans, creating gaps that no one expected. The galaxy celebrated the new efficiency. The Council congratulated itself on removing redundancy. And in the quiet corners of space, humans packed their belongings and prepared to go home, carrying with them secrets that no one realized they possessed. 3 months had passed since the human delegation walked out of the Galactic Council chambers. The galaxy had quickly forgotten about their departure, busy with the usual concerns of trade, politics, and expansion. Most species believed that removing humans would make everything run more smoothly. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The first major problem appeared in the Galactic Trade Network, the massive computer system that coordinated the movement of goods between thousands of worlds had always seemed to run perfectly. Ships arrived on time, cargo was distributed efficiently, and shortages were rare. What most people did not know was that a human named Wu Jin had spent 15 years fine-tuning the system's responses to unexpected problems. Wu Jin had never held an important title or received public recognition. His official job was Systems Maintenance Technician Level 3. But every day he made hundreds of small adjustments that kept trade flowing smoothly. When a solar storm disrupted communications in the outer rim, Wu Jin rerouted traffic through alternate channels. When the Crystal Consortium's mining ships ran behind schedule, he adjusted delivery windows to prevent bottlenecks. When new trade routes opened up, he modified the network to handle the changed traffic patterns. Now Wu Jin was gone, and the trade network was trying to function with only its automated systems. The advanced computers could handle routine operations, but they had no intuition. They could not anticipate problems or make creative solutions. They followed their programming exactly, with no ability to adapt to unexpected situations. The crisis began with something small. A shipping convoy carrying rare metals from the Vega system was delayed by mechanical problems. In the past, Wu Jin would have noticed the delay immediately and rerouted other ships to maintain the delivery schedule. The automated system did notice the delay, but it responded by following its standard protocol. It waited for the convoy to repair itself and resume course. While the system waited, 3 major manufacturing centers in the inner worlds ran out of the materials they needed. Production lines shut down. Workers were sent home. The shortage rippled through 17 different industries before anyone realized what was happening. When the crisis finally reached the attention of senior officials, they assigned the problem to Crixtal, the most advanced artificial intelligence in the trade consortium. Crixtal analyzed the situation with incredible speed and precision. It could process data from millions of sources simultaneously and calculate optimal solutions in microseconds. But Crixtal could not understand why the human had made certain decisions in the past. The AI found thousands of instances where Wu Jin had violated standard protocols, made changes that seemed inefficient, or rerouted traffic in ways that appeared to waste time and fuel. To Crixtal, these looked like mistakes. What the AI could not comprehend was that Wu Jin had been solving problems that had not happened yet. He had recognized patterns that indicated future difficulties and made adjustments to prevent them. He had understood that sometimes taking a longer route today prevented a traffic jam tomorrow. He had known which shipping companies were reliable and which ones were likely to have delays. Crixtal tried to reverse all of Wu Jin's mistakes and return the system to optimal efficiency. The result was a cascade of failures that brought interstellar commerce to a near standstill within a week. While the trade network struggled, another crisis was developing in galactic communications. The Universal Translation Protocol had made communication between hundreds of different species possible. Everyone assumed it was a purely technological achievement, a triumph of advanced computing and linguistic analysis. The truth was more complicated. At the heart of the system was a team of human linguists led by a woman named So Young. For 25 years, she had worked to bridge the gaps between machine translation and true understanding. Languages were more than just words and grammar rules. They carried cultural meanings, emotional subtleties, and historical contexts that computers could process but not truly comprehend. So Young had spent decades learning the nuances of alien cultures. She understood that when a hegemony diplomat said that proposal has merit, he actually meant absolutely not, but I don't want to cause offense. She knew that Crystal Consortium negotiators used elaborate metaphors that meant nothing unless you understood their religious beliefs. She had trained the translation system to recognize these subtleties and adjust its output accordingly. With So Young gone, the translation protocol began producing increasingly confused communications. The system still worked at a basic level, converting words from one language to another. But the deeper meanings were lost. Diplomatic messages became unclear. Trade negotiations stalled as participants misunderstood each other's intentions. Cultural exchanges turned into unintentional insults. The problems came to a head during a routine trade negotiation between the hegemony and the Federation of Rings. The hegemony delegation offered to share the burden of mineral extraction in the disputed zone. The Federation heard this as help with mining operations in the agreed territory. What the hegemony actually meant was, we'll take control of the mines and let you have a small percentage of the profits. By the time the misunderstanding was discovered, both sides had signed agreements that meant completely different things to each party. The Federation began mining operations, believing they had full rights to the territory. The hegemony moved in with military ships expecting to take control of Federation equipment. A border conflict that had been peacefully managed for 50 years suddenly erupted into open hostility. But the most dangerous crisis was one that nobody noticed yet. In the dark regions beyond the galaxy's outer rim, ancient sensors detected the first stirrings of the devourer swarms. These were creatures of dark space, beings that fed on stellar energy and reduced entire solar systems to cold, empty void. They had been dormant for 3 centuries, but now they were beginning to wake up. The early warning network that monitored these regions had been designed by the galaxy's best scientists and equipped with the most advanced detection equipment. But it had been operated by a human named Yeon Su, who had an almost supernatural ability to recognize the subtle patterns that indicated swarm activity. Yeon Su had never fully understood her own talent. She could look at sensor readings that seemed normal to everyone else and somehow know that something was wrong. She could spot the tiny gravitational anomalies that preceded swarm movement, the minute energy fluctuations that indicated their feeding patterns, the barely detectable quantum signatures that marked their breeding cycles. The automated systems that replaced her were far more sophisticated than anything that had existed when she first took the job. They could detect objects smaller than a grain of sand from halfway across the galaxy. They could analyze thousands of different types of energy signatures simultaneously. They could process information at speeds that no biological mind could match. But they had been programmed to look for known threats. They searched for familiar energy patterns, recognized weapon signatures, and tracked the movement of conventional spacecraft. The devourer swarms were older than galactic civilization, and their signatures did not match anything in the computer databases. While the galaxy focused on trade disputes and communication problems, the swarms continued their ancient awakening process in the depths of space. The first scouts had already begun moving toward inhabited systems, following trails of stellar radiation like predators following scent. But the early warning system saw only background noise, cosmic radiation, and natural phenomena. On the frontier world of Haven's Edge, colonists began reporting strange dreams. Ships' crews in the outer systems mentioned odd equipment malfunctions. Deep space monitoring stations recorded unusual energy readings that their computers classified as anomalous but non-threatening. Yeon Su would have recognized these signs immediately. She would have known that the swarms were stirring and begun tracking their movement patterns. She would have alerted the Galactic Defense Force and started evacuation procedures for the most vulnerable colonies. Instead, the reports were filed away as routine anomalies. The strange dreams were attributed to stress. The equipment malfunctions were blamed on old hardware. The energy readings were noted and then forgotten. Meanwhile, the galaxy's other problems continued to multiply. The trade network failures had created shortages of essential goods on dozens of worlds. The translation errors had sparked 3 separate diplomatic incidents and 2 border skirmishes. Systems that had functioned perfectly for centuries were beginning to break down. In the Galactic Council chambers, Speaker Veltar met with his senior advisors to discuss the growing crisis. They had reports of communication failures, trade disruptions, and increasing tensions between member species. The problems seemed to be happening everywhere at once, but no one could explain why. These appeared to be unrelated technical difficulties, reported Advisor Nexrel, a spider-like being with excellent analytical abilities. Our investigation teams have found no evidence of sabotage or coordinated attack. Could this be connected to the human departure? Asked Veltar, though he seemed reluctant to suggest it. Impossible, replied Chief Technology Officer Zar Helm. Humans held only minor technica. 6 months after humanity's departure, the galaxy was falling apart. What had started as minor technical problems had grown into a crisis that threatened the foundation of interstellar civilization. In the Galactic Council chambers, emergency sessions ran day and night as desperate officials tried to understand what was happening to their perfect society. The latest disaster involved the hyperspace navigation network. For 3 centuries, ships had traveled between the stars using carefully mapped routes through hyperspace. These routes required constant monitoring and adjustment because the fabric of space itself was always changing. Gravitational fields shifted, dark matter concentrations moved, and stellar activity created new hazards that could destroy any ship that wandered into them. The navigation network had always seemed completely automated. Ships received route updates from central computers that calculated the safest and fastest paths between destinations. What most people did not know was that a human named Ki Wan had spent 30 years fine-tuning those calculations. Kiwan had possessed an intuitive understanding of how space behaved. He could look at gravitational readings and somehow know when an area was becoming unstable. He could predict where dark matter storms would form weeks before the computers detected them. He could sense the subtle patterns that indicated when a hyperspace road was about to become dangerous. The automated systems that replaced him were incredibly sophisticated. They processed data from thousands of sensors scattered throughout the galaxy. They calculated gravitational forces with mathematical precision. They updated route information in real time based on changing conditions, but they lacked Kiwan's intuition. They could only respond to threats that had already formed, not predict dangers that were still developing. They followed mathematical models that worked perfectly in theory, but sometimes failed in the complex reality of space. The consequences became clear when the merchant vessel Star Trader attempted to travel from the core worlds to the outer rim using the computer-generated route. The ship emerged from hyperspace 3 days late and 2 systems off course. The crew reported that their route had taken them through an area of intense gravitational distortion that had nearly torn their ship apart. Investigation revealed that Kiwan would have predicted the gravitational anomaly weeks earlier and rerouted traffic away from the danger zone. The computers had detected the anomaly only after it had fully formed, too late to warn ships already in transit. Within days, similar incidents were reported throughout the galaxy. Ships arrived late, off course, or damaged by hazards that should have been predicted. Some ships stopped arriving at all. The hyperspace network that had connected the galaxy for centuries was becoming unreliable and dangerous. The crisis deepened when the Galactic Medical Exchange began to collapse. This system coordinated medical care between species, sharing knowledge about diseases, treatments, and biological compatibility issues. It had been managed by Dr. Yun-hee, a human physician who had spent 20 years studying the biological differences between alien species. Dr. Yun-hee had understood that medicine was not just about treating symptoms. Different species reacted to the same disease in completely different ways. A virus that was harmless to one species could be deadly to another. Treatments that cured one type of alien could poison a different type. Managing medical care across hundreds of different biologies required both scientific knowledge and intuitive understanding. The artificial intelligence systems that replaced her had access to vast medical databases. They could diagnose diseases with perfect accuracy and recommend treatments based on comprehensive biological profiles. They could process medical information from across the galaxy and provide instant consultation on the most complex cases, but they could not understand the subtle interactions between different alien biologies. They followed treatment protocols exactly, without considering the unique circumstances of each patient. They prescribed medications based on database recommendations, without recognizing when those recommendations might be dangerous for specific individuals. The disaster began on the colony world of New Harmony, where multiple species lived together in a carefully balanced ecosystem. A routine outbreak of Centauri flu, normally a minor illness, began spreading between species in unexpected ways. The AI medical systems prescribed standard treatments for each species separately, not realizing that the combination of medications was creating toxic interactions. Within weeks, what should have been a minor health issue had become a plague that threatened to kill half the colony's population. Emergency medical teams rushed to the scene, but they could not understand what had gone wrong. The treatments were all correct according to the databases. The medications were all safe according to the protocols. Dr. Yun-hee would have recognized the problem immediately. She had dealt with similar situations dozens of times. Understanding that living together changed how different species responded to disease and treatment. She would have modified the treatment protocols to account for the complex biological interactions. Instead, the colony had to be quarantined while medical experts tried to figure out what was happening. By the time they understood the problem, similar outbreaks had begun on 17 other mixed-species worlds. The economic consequences of these failures were becoming catastrophic. The Galactic Trade Network was operating at only 60% efficiency. Transportation delays were creating shortages of essential goods. Medical quarantines were restricting travel and commerce. Manufacturing centers were shutting down due to supply problems. On the industrial world of Forge Prime, the massive factories that produced Starship components had been forced to close when their supply of rare metals was disrupted by transportation failures. 30 million workers were unemployed. and the ripple effects were spreading to dozens of other worlds that depended on Forge Prime's production. The Crystal Consortium's mining operations in the Vega system had ground to a halt when a communication error led to a territorial dispute with the local government. The misunderstanding could have been resolved quickly in the past, but without human mediators to bridge the cultural differences, negotiations had broken down completely. In the Outer Rim, frontier colonies were reporting increasing numbers of missing ships and failed supply runs. The early warning systems that should have detected hazards were functioning perfectly according to their technical specifications, but somehow they were missing real threats. Council Speaker Veltar called an emergency session to address the growing crisis. The Great Hall was filled with angry voices as representatives from hundreds of worlds demanded explanations and solutions. Our civilization is collapsing, declared Ambassador Zontar of the Federation of Rings. Systems that worked perfectly for centuries are failing simultaneously. This cannot be coincidence. The technical failures are cascading, reported Chief Engineer Malketh. Each system failure creates additional stress on other systems. We are experiencing what humans used to call a domino effect. The mention of humans created uncomfortable silence in the hall. For 6 months, the Council had refused to acknowledge any connection between the human departure and the current crisis. But the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Perhaps, suggested Advisor Nexrel carefully, we should examine the roles that humans actually performed in our society. The investigation that followed revealed the shocking truth. Humans had not been minor functionaries as everyone believed. They had been essential components of almost every major system in galactic civilization. They had served as early warning specialists, cultural mediators, intuitive problem solvers, and pattern recognition experts. More importantly, they had often worked in roles that were invisible to the official bureaucracy. They had prevented problems before they occurred, solved conflicts before they escalated, and maintained systems through thousands of small, undocumented adjustments. The reports filled hundreds of pages with examples of human contributions that had been overlooked or forgotten. Logistics Coordinator Do Hyun had prevented supply shortages by predicting demand fluctuations months in advance. Cultural Specialist Minna had prevented 17 war between different species by resolving misunderstandings before they became conflicts. Engineer Jun Ho had maintained deep space monitoring equipment that no one else understood. Each human had been a critical node in the network of galactic civilization. Their removal had created gaps that artificial intelligence and other species could not fill. The humans had not just performed jobs. They had been the connective tissue that held everything together. We must contact them, declared Speaker Veltar. We must ask them to return. But when the Council tried to send messages to human space, they discovered another problem. No one knew where humanity had gone. The human colonies that had existed for centuries were empty. The space stations where humans had worked were abandoned. The entire species seemed to have vanished without a trace. Deep space sensors detected no signs of human activity anywhere in the galaxy. There were no distress signals, no ship movements, no communications. It was as if humanity had simply stopped existing. Search teams were dispatched to investigate former human territories. They found the colonies intact but completely empty. The buildings were undamaged. The equipped 9 months after humanity's departure, the galaxy faced its darkest hour. The search for the missing humans had revealed the full scope of their contributions to galactic civilization. Hidden archives and forgotten reports painted a picture that shocked even the Council's most experienced leaders. The investigation was led by xenoarchaeologist Thekval, who had been tasked with understanding how humans had become so integral to galactic society without anyone noticing. What he discovered in the deep archives changed everything the Council thought they knew about their former colleagues. The records showed that a human named Insu had been working quietly to prevent first contact violations with dormant civilizations. For 15 years, he had monitored 17 different worlds where ancient species lay in deep hibernation or technological suspension. These civilizations had been sleeping for thousands of years, waiting for conditions that would allow them to awaken safely. Insu had tracked the complex cycles that governed their dormancy periods. He had ensured that galactic shipping routes stayed away from their worlds during critical awakening phases. He had prevented mining operations from disturbing their rest and blocked colonization efforts that might have triggered premature revival. The artificial intelligence systems that replaced him had no knowledge of these sleeping civilizations. The information was not in any official database because the Council had decided long ago that sleeping species did not need to be monitored. Only Insu had understood that disturbing them could be catastrophic. 3 weeks ago, a Crystal Consortium mining fleet had begun operations in the Kepler system, following a computer-approved mining plan. They had unknowingly begun drilling near the hibernation chambers of the Eternal Order, a species that had been dormant for 5,000 years. The disturbance had triggered their emergency awakening protocols. The Eternal Order was not hostile, but their technology was so far beyond current galactic standards that their simple attempts to communicate had disrupted electronics across 3 systems. Their awakening had also destabilized the quantum fields that kept other dormant civilizations asleep. Within days, ancient species were stirring throughout the galaxy. Some were peaceful but confused and disoriented by the changes that had occurred during their sleep. Others were aggressive, viewing the current galactic civilization as invaders in their territory. All of them possessed technology that made them extremely dangerous, but the awakening ancients were not the worst problem. In another archive, investigators found records of Daun, a human peacekeeper who had been managing 63 ongoing territorial disputes through informal back-channel negotiations. She had never held an official diplomatic position, but she had prevented dozens of wars through careful relationship management and cultural understanding. Daun had understood that most conflicts between alien species were based on misunderstandings rather than genuine hostility. She had spent years learning the subtle signs that indicated when tensions were rising. She had known which leaders could be trusted to keep agreements and which ones needed careful monitoring. Her replacement had been a sophisticated conflict resolution AI called the Diplomatic Solution Engine. The AI could analyze territorial disputes with mathematical precision and recommend optimal solutions based on historical precedents and game theory calculations. But the AI did not understand that some conflicts could not be solved by logic alone. It did not recognize that sometimes the best solution was not the most efficient one. It could not build the personal relationships that made informal agreements possible. Without Daun's quiet intervention, old disputes were erupting into open warfare. The Hegemony and the Federation of Rings were mobilizing their fleets over mining rights that Daun had managed to keep peaceful for 30 years. The Crystal Consortium was threatening military action against 3 different neighbors over trade route disagreements. Most dangerous of all, the ancient rivalry between the tech-advanced Nexari Union and the psychically gifted Void-Touched was heating up again. These 2 species had fought devastating wars in the past, conflicts that had nearly destroyed entire sectors of the galaxy. Daun had spent a decade building trust between their leaders and maintaining the delicate balance that kept them at peace. Now that balance was gone. Void-Touched raids had destroyed 2 Nexari research stations. Nexari retaliation had wiped out a Void-Touched colony. Both sides were preparing for a war that could spread across half the galaxy. The archives revealed dozens of similar situations. Human engineer Junho had been maintaining deep space monitoring networks that tracked dark matter storms, gravitational anomalies, and other cosmic hazards. His replacement systems were failing to detect dangers that Junho would have spotted immediately. Human cultural specialist Heejin had been preventing religious conflicts between species with incompatible belief systems. Her subtle mediation had kept the peace between groups that viewed each other as heretics or demons. Human trade coordinator Sang Min had been managing the complex economic relationships between species with completely different concepts of value and exchange. His work had prevented economic warfare and maintained the prosperity that held the galaxy together. Every human had been a critical component in the vast machine of galactic civilization. They had worked quietly without recognition or fanfare, solving problems before they became crises and maintaining systems through intuition and experience that could not be replicated. But the most shocking discovery came when investigators examined the Outer Rim monitoring stations. They found records of Yonsu, the human technician who had been tracking the Devourer swarms for 25 years. The swarms were not just ancient predators. They were the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced. Beings that could consume entire solar systems and reproduce by feeding on stellar energy. They had been dormant in the dark spaces beyond the galaxy for 3 centuries, but they were cyclical creatures that awakened periodically to feed and breed. Yonsu had been tracking their awakening cycle and preparing defenses against their return. She had identified their migration patterns, understood their feeding behaviors, and developed early warning systems that could detect their approach months before they reached inhabited systems. The automated systems that replaced her had no knowledge of the swarms. The information was classified at the highest levels, known only to a few council members and the human monitoring team. When the humans left, they had taken this knowledge with them. Now the swarms were stirring, and no one in the galaxy knew they existed. The first signs had been appearing for weeks, but they had been misinterpreted as natural phenomena. Strange energy readings in the outer rim were attributed to stellar activity. Ships reporting equipment malfunctions were told to perform routine maintenance. Colonies experiencing unusual dreams and psychological effects were advised to check their atmospheric processors. But the signs were growing stronger. 3 frontier colonies had gone completely silent. Deep space monitoring stations were detecting massive energy signatures moving through the void between galaxies. Hyperspace routes near the rim were becoming unstable as something enormous moved through the dark. When the Council finally understood what was happening, panic spread through the galactic government. The Devourer swarms were not just returning, they were arriving in greater numbers than ever before. The long dormancy period had allowed them to breed in the dark spaces, and now they were emerging as a vast tide of hunger that could devour everything in its path. Military Commander Zorketh was placed in charge of galactic defense preparations. He had access to the combined fleets of every major species, weapons technology beyond anything the swarms had faced in the past, and the most advanced strategic computers in the galaxy. But he did not have the knowledge that humans had possessed. He did not know the swarm's weaknesses, their movement patterns, or their reproductive cycles. He did not understand how they chose their targets or how they could be predicted and avoided. The military computers could analyze the swarm's energy signatures and calculate optimal battle formations. They could coordinate fleet movements across hundreds of light years and manage logistics for billions of soldiers, but they could not replace the intuitive understanding that Yonsu had developed through decades of patient observation. Zorketh's first attempts at defense were disasters. He positioned fleets at what the computers calculated were optimal interception points, only to discover that the swarms avoided conventional space routes entirely. He prepared weapons designed to target the swarm's energy cores, but found that their anatomy was completely different from what the databases predicted. The swarms moved through space like a living tide, consuming everything in their path. They did not attack in the way that normal enemies attacked. They simply absorbed stellar energy, planetary resources, and any technology they encountered. Entire systems were left as cold, empty voids in their wake. Desperate for any advantage, the Council authorized a galaxy-wide search for the missing humans. Every available ship was assigned to scan space for signs of human activity. Diplomatic missions were sent to every corner of the galaxy offering amnesty, rewards, and full restoration of human rights. But the search foment was P. 1 year after humanity's departure, the galaxy stood on the edge of complete destruction. The Devourer swarms had consumed 18 star systems and were advancing toward the core worlds where billions of beings lived. Ancient civilizations had awakened from their long sleep and were demanding explanations for the changes they found. Wars raged between species that had lived in peace for centuries. The great machine of galactic civilization was grinding to a halt. In the hidden dimension that existed folded within normal space, humanity watched the galaxy's death throes from their new home. They had built New Terra in a pocket of reality that was invisible to all known sensors. Here, in a space no larger than a solar system but containing the resources of a dozen worlds, 3 billion humans had created a civilization beyond anything the galaxy had ever imagined. President Boram had aged gracefully in the year since humanity's departure. Her hair had turned completely silver, but her eyes remained sharp and determined. She stood in the observation deck of the central tower, looking out at the impossible sight of Earth-like continents floating in a sea of stars. The technology that made this place possible was purely human, developed in secret over 3 centuries of quiet preparation. "The Council is broadcasting again," reported her aide, Sung Min, a young man who would soon take over leadership of their people. "They're offering full membership Equal representation and formal recognition of our contributions. Boram nodded without surprise. They had been monitoring galactic communications since their departure, watching the slow collapse of everything they had once helped to maintain. The messages from the Council had grown increasingly desperate over the months, offering greater and greater concessions in exchange for humanity's return. "What are they offering this time?" she asked. "Permanent seats on the High Council for all human worlds, guaranteed veto power over any decisions affecting human interests, full access to all galactic technology and resources, and—" Sungmin paused, checking his notes. "A formal apology from Speaker Veltar himself." Boram smiled sadly. The offers were meaningless now. The humans had moved beyond the need for galactic recognition or resources. In their hidden realm, they had developed technologies that made the galaxy's greatest achievements look primitive. They had solved problems of energy, space, and time that other species had not even begun to understand. "Show me the tactical situation," Boram said. The holographic display that appeared showed the galaxy in 3 dimensions, with colored markers indicating the various crises unfolding across civilized space. Red zones marked the advance of the devourer swarms. Yellow areas showed conflicts between awakened ancient civilizations and current galactic powers. Orange regions indicated wars between member species. Purple dots marked failed systems and abandoned colonies. The pattern was clear to anyone who understood how galactic civilization had really functioned. Every crisis was centered on areas where humans had previously worked. Every system failure had occurred in sectors where human expertise had been essential. The galaxy was not just losing a war, it was experiencing complete systemic collapse. "The swarms will reach Nexus Prime in 4 days, reported Defense Coordinator Myung-hoon, a stern man who had once served as humanity's military liaison to the galactic forces. "The evacuation is proceeding, but most species don't have the ships to move their entire populations." "What about their military response?" asked Boram. "Ineffective. Commander Zorketh is trying to fight them like a conventional enemy, but the swarms don't follow any known tactical patterns. He's lost 60% of the combined galactic fleet without slowing their advance." Boram studied the display for a long moment. The swarms were moving in patterns that she recognized from old reports. They were following the same routes they had used 3 centuries ago, when humanity had first learned to track them. But without human knowledge to guide them, the galactic forces were fighting blind. "Call a council meeting," she said finally. "It's time to decide." Within an hour, the leadership of New Terra had assembled in the Great Council chamber. Unlike the massive, ornate hall where the Galactic Council met, this room was simple and functional. Representatives from every human world and station sat in comfortable chairs arranged in a circle, with no elevated platforms or positions of special privilege. The debate that followed would determine not just humanity's future, but the fate of an entire galaxy. Dr. Sijin, the elderly woman who led humanity's scientific community, spoke first. "We cannot simply watch while trillions of innocent beings die. We have the knowledge to stop the swarms and the ability to restore the damaged systems. We are still human, which means we are still capable of compassion." "Compassion for people who exiled us?" replied Admiral J1, the head of humanity's small but advanced defense forces. "They dismissed us as redundant. They said our contributions were worthless. They chose to replace us with machines rather than recognize our value. Why should we save people who rejected us? Because that's what humans do," answered Dr. Sijin firmly. "We help people who need help even if they've wronged us. That's not weakness. That's what makes us human." Engineer Yuna, who had been working on the advanced systems that kept New Terra functioning, offered a different perspective. "We could help them without revealing ourselves. We have the technology to create automated systems that could restore their networks and provide early warning about the swarms. We could save them without returning to their society." "And then what?" asked Admiral J1. "Do we become their invisible guardians forever? Do we clean up their mistakes for the rest of time while they remain ignorant of our sacrifice?" President Boram listened to the debate for hours. Every person in the room had valid points. Humanity had every right to feel betrayed by the galaxy's treatment of them. They had built something wonderful in New Terra, a society where their contributions were valued and their potential could be fully realized. Why should they give that up to return to a galaxy that had never appreciated them? But she also knew that Dr. Sijin was right. Humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their intelligence. It had been their ability to care about others even at personal cost. That compassion was what had made them valuable to galactic civilization in the first place. "I've made my decision," Bahram said finally. The room fell silent. "We will help them, but not by returning to our old roles as invisible servants. We will save the galaxy, but we will do it on our terms." She stood and walked to the center of the circle. "Dr. C. Jin is correct that we cannot stand by while innocents suffer. But Admiral J. Wan is also right that we deserve better than to be taken for granted again. So we will offer them a gift, not our service, but our knowledge." The plan that Bahram outlined was elegant in its simplicity. Humanity would create a new generation of automated systems, far more advanced than anything the galaxy possessed. These systems would restore the failed networks, provide early warning of threats, and maintain the essential functions that kept civilization running. But these systems would not be controlled by humans. They would be truly autonomous, capable of learning and adapting without human intervention. The galaxy would receive humanity's knowledge and protection, but they would never again be dependent on human operators. "We will give them the tools to save themselves," Bahram explained, "but we will not become their tools again." The work began immediately. Human engineers who had spent decades understanding galactic systems designed new networks that could function without human oversight. Scientists who had tracked the devourer swarms for generations programmed early warning systems that could predict their movements with perfect accuracy. Diplomats who had prevented countless wars created mediation protocols that could resolve conflicts automatically. It was the greatest technological achievement in human history, combining 3 centuries of accumulated knowledge with advances that other species would not discover for thousands of years. The new systems were not just improvements on existing technology. They were entirely new forms of artificial life, capable of growth and evolution. As the devourer swarms approached Nexus Prime, humanity deployed their gift to the galaxy. The systems appeared simultaneously throughout civilized space, materializing from hyperspace like seeds taking root in fertile soil. The trade network was restored in minutes, with new routing algorithms that could predict and prevent disruptions months in advance. The translation protocol was upgraded with cultural understanding that surpassed even human intuition. The early warning system began tracking threats that no one had previously imagined could be detected. Most importantly, the new defense network immediately began coordinating the galactic response to the devourer swarms. The system understood their biology, their behavior patterns, and their weaknesses. It could predict their movements and guide the galactic fleets to intercept them effectively. The swarms were stopped just 3 days before they would have reached the core worlds. The ancient civilizations were guided back to peaceful dormancy. The wars between member species were resolved through mediation protocols that understood the deep cultural differences driving the conflicts.